The presentation. All right. This is the first time I've used Google Meet to present, but I'll do my best. First of all, before we get going, just wanted to say thank you to Honey for helping to get this set up. I know we've been communicating through email for a few days, getting all of the logistical stuff taken care of. So thank you for allowing me the time and the platform to share some of my thoughts in regards to the power of media in these unconventional times that we're living in. So let me get it set up here. All right. All right, can you see my screen? I will take that as a yes. All right. So, one of the big things that I've noticed ever since the pandemic started and when all the civil unrest started earlier during the year, it got me thinking about the issue of artistic expression in troubled times like this, with everyone being on quarantine and staying at home. It's been something that's given me a lot of time for personal reflection and understanding understanding the importance of why we as developers and creatives do what we do. So, just a little information about me before we get started. The studio that I run is called Berry Guild. Been active for 2 years now. This is the title of our first project. It's a dark comedy, drama, slice of life story called I'm Oh So Busy, A Week with Yoshimi. If anyone is interested in learning more about it, or if they would like a demo of this title, please send me an email after this is over. I'll type it in the chat so all of you can see it. Starting off with just some definitions and connections of some of the topics I wanted to talk about. I would define history, expression, art, trouble, and civil society in the following ways, based on the literal definitions. But I would see history as a chronological record of significant events, an expression being based on the freedom of expression as an act, process, or instance of representing in a medium. Art being the conscious use of skill and creative imagination, especially in the production of aesthetic objects. All of the different mediums, not just with what we do, but everything from paintings to songs, TV shows, and articulated speech all comprise this definition. And I define trouble as an unrest or a disturbance. And in the title that I gave to Honey, I mentioned the topic of civil society. that being the fellowships or associations with one's fellows and institutions in a given space. All of the organizations and associations that we have between the state and the individual comprise that space that makes up civil society. So these are some of the things that I wanted to touch on. So some of the questions that I wanted to discuss included: how did historical times of hardship affect artistic expression and vice versa? How is hardship and history represented in contemporary and older media? And how will current global economic, societal, and cultural trends impact artistic expression in the near future? Right now, we're living in some very unconventional times. And it's important, I feel, that we look back on history to see how those who lived during the time, and even today those that have knowledge of that history, cope and understand it through various forms of media. These are just my views on the matter. During times of crisis, artistic expression can greatly flourish as a way to express emotional lows and highs. The space provided by civil society should serve to elevate freedom of expression, especially during times of hardship like this. The trouble brought on by times of disaster can be expressed using various creative mediums. And creative expression has become a lot easier than ever before, thanks to the internet, which allows us to have this global audience. These are just some of the methods of analysis and the sources of data that I used to formulate my arguments. When I talk about historical events, I'm going to be talking about American history over the past 80 years. Things such as the Cold War, the Great Depression, World War II, and beyond are what will comprise this. With television shows, I'll be focusing on the Cold War. With films, I'll be focusing on World War II. With literature, I'll be focusing on the Great Depression. And with music, I'll be focusing on some of the more modern day social issues. And with video games, I'll be discussing societal and cultural shifts, as well as my experiences over the past 2 years. Going first into television and film, when I talk about the Cold War, I mean it more so in the tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union from 1947 to 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Some of the shows that I had researched included Danger Man, which was on television from 1960 to 1962. It followed the stories of a spy known as John Drake and talked about the ethics of NATO during the early years of the Cold War. In animation, I referenced the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, which was a cartoon that had two characters named Natasha and Boris, who were shown as Soviet villains. And MacGyver, which aired from 1985 to 1992, which gives reference to the Vietnam War through the experiences of the main character and US espionage during the final years of the Cold War. These were all examples of shows that I had found which used the Cold War as a form of expression. Music was a lot easier to find research on because all of the various social issues that had gone on during the 2010s were issues where I could find a plethora of songs that were able to take issues and help them to gain larger acceptance. Great examples of this include Same Love by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, which was released in 2012 and served as a way to enhance the issue of LGBT rights. 2 years ago, we had the song This Is America by Childish Gambino, which focused on issues such as racism, discrimination, gun violence, and the relations between law enforcement and their communities. And we had the song 1 800 273 8255 by Logic a year prior, which focused on the issue of mental illness and suicide prevention. There are a lot more issues that were going on during the time, but these were some of the biggest examples that I found. As for literature, I mentioned the Great Depression, which went on from 1929 to 1941. And there were many books written during and after the time that expressed the hardships of families and individuals in the Great Depression. And one of the most prolific writers of that time was John Steinbeck, who in 1937 wrote and published Of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath 2 years later. One of the more contemporary books that covers this issue is by Ben Montgomery, titled The Man Who Walked Backward: An American Dreamer's Search for Meaning in the Great Depression. All of these serve as a means to express the issues that were going on at the time. John Steinbeck a lot more, having lived through it, and Ben Montgomery from learning about it and researching it. There are a lot more examples when it comes to societal and cultural shifts, when it comes to gaming. But when I researched it, I had thought back to the Grand Theft Auto series, which started in 2001 and still goes on to this day. Many narratives and issues, such as the drug war and the Cold War, were expressed in Vice City. Taking place during the 1980s, when the drug war was still in full effect and where drug smuggling was still a very big issue, as well as being in the final decades of the Cold War. And with all of these games, you can see the issue of organized crime, with 3, 4, and Vice City included, as well as our changing views on celebrity figures and issues that can come up during family life were represented in the 5th installment. Heavily satirized, of course, especially through the radio broadcasts of all of these titles. But I believe it serves as an interesting example of the societal and cultural shifts that have occurred over the past 2 decades. Having finished university a couple of months ago, many of the issues that I had experienced and seen others experience, such as coming of age and finding purpose and meaning, and being able to influence the world and vice versa, were some big things that kept reoccurring with me over the past 2 years. Other issues such as solitude, sense of self, and how your upbringing can affect you also came up as well as the experiences that can be brought on from school and college and just going through those changes. It also showed me that the independent scene is quite massive. Felt like for every major title that came out, you could find maybe 20 or 40 or 50 independent titles that could come out that same day. This was research that I had recently done, and I'm hoping that it can be expanded on in the time to come. But some of the conclusions that I had drawn from looking over this is that the internet allows all of us a space for for us to use our freedom of expression and our creativity to cover a wide variety of mediums. Artistic expression can serve as a means to describe issues and to advance viewpoints if that's something that you want to do. Some of the examples that I used these issues in a more satirical sense and wasn't really trying to push one viewpoint or the other, but it's still there. We're now living in an unprecedented time to spread our work, and historical and oftentimes hard points in history can be displayed in a variety of mediums. Now that all of us are at home and all of us are communicating online more and more, it could open up a new means for independent creators to get their work out further, or as a means to communicate with others, like we're doing right now. That's all that I have to present. Honey, I appreciate you for giving me the chance to express these viewpoints and for allowing me to talk about the issue. Thank you. I can take questions if anyone has any.
Thanks for your presentation. Have you looked at all into or looked much into cultural studies research, forming some of these ideas?
One course that I did take a few years ago, thank you for the question, by the way. It was a course related to the film and literature of the Cold War that had come out in the United States. Many titles that some of us might know, including Top Gun, Doctor Strangelove, and even Red Dawn, were things that we had touched upon in that course. And from learning about this event and learning about possibilities to talk about issues, it just felt like something interesting to talk about. Have I studied cultural issues any further? No, I haven't.
So, and if you're interested in looking into this a little bit more, there's a book I would highly recommend by Soraya Murray from who's a faculty at UC Santa Cruz called On Video Games, where she's taken a lot of cultural studies lenses onto video games, both how culture in the US has shaped the games industry and its products, but also how games have in return shaped culture in the US. And I think that would be an interesting read for you if that's something that if this is a topic you're interested in looking into further.
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate it, and I will be certain to look up that book.
Yeah. I will drop a link to it in the chat.
Go for it. Anyone else? Oh, there it is. I will be sure to check out the link afterwards.
All right.
No, if no one has any questions, that's all that I had to talk about. Thank you, honey. And Olivia, I appreciate the time to be here, and I hope that all of you have a good rest of your day. Thank you. So that's all that we have for the next 90 minutes. All right. I am going to go back to the gather page. And I've got to say, I've never seen a layout like this before. Is this a new product or a software that's been made? We'll talk about it in the server. All right. Thank you.